Huh? Oh, I can do that. Thank you. That button on the right.
Just a little bit.
Okay, got it. All right, good morning. So let me give you a quick preview of what's coming. Today we will finish, it took me a lot longer to get through than I thought it would, the reasons why there is no God. And then next week, we will just spend 1 week going through the reasons why there is a God. And then the following week, we start Romans. And you're just going to need to buckle in on Romans, even if you've studied it before. It's such a good refresher. Wayne gave me a book a couple weeks ago from N.T. Wright called The Heart of Romans. It's a, 150, 200 page book. It's on one chapter. He writes that much on chapter 8. It's one of those books that as I'm reading it, I read a few pages at a time and then stop and think about it. Because if you just try to blow through it, you'll miss everything. But I don't have any idea how long that study's gonna take. Jeff told me I couldn't get it done in a year, but hopefully we'll be able to move a little quicker than that. I don't think I've explained this picture. This picture was taken from our back porch when we were on vacation in Hawaii. And the reason I took it is I was thinking about this study. There's a great line in the song Redeemer called "Who Told the Oceans You Can Only Go This Far?" And as I was sitting watching this, and it was very stormy, in fact it stormed pretty much every day on that vacation, and the waves got huge, and they never went past a certain point. Now I understand that sometimes hurricanes and things like that will move it, but every single day the waves stopped. And you're kind of going, okay, how do you not believe there's a God? Right? He created something so meticulous that the waves would only get so far up the shore. So that's the reason for that picture. So we've gone through a lot. Oops. So today, as we go through our 7 questions on deeps of doubt, we've covered 1 and 2 and 5. How there can't be just one religion. How can a good God allow or worse cause suffering? How can a loving God send people to hell? Today we're going to get through maybe all the rest of the 4 as we go through these on why people doubt in a God or in Christianity, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about Christianity today. So I want you to think about this statement. Love the Joseph one. All right, agree or disagree? Christians believe that they have the absolute truth and everyone has to believe or else. That attitude endangers everyone's freedom. Absolute truth is the enemy of freedom. True, false? Come on, this is an all skate.
False.
Okay, well, but when you're confronted, let's say you're spreading the gospel, you're talking to a friend, you're talking to a family member, and you lead off with, you got to be a Christian, or you're not going to make it to heaven. You've got to accept the premise that Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father but through me. That is an exclusive statement and straps you into a straitjacket. True? Come on.
Sure, it's true.
Sure, it's true. It is. It's very straitjacket-ish, right? I mean, it's hard to argue that if you're going to take the position of the or else, you've just drawn the line in the sand. And unless you take the position that you're going to believe in Jesus Christ, there's no more discussion. You're out. You're excluded from the club. What's the problem with that approach?
There's nothing to talk about after that.
Right, and so what you're actually saying is, you have no really free. If you want to have freedom to believe and you don't believe this, then you're out.
Well, it seems like it makes it about you instead of the real object of this, right? Which is Christ. You know, I'm in the club, you're not in the club. Join the club or die. You know, I don't think that's the way Jesus would have had us laid out.
Well, no, but if he says the only way you can get to heaven, you gotta be in the club, and the only way you can be in the club is you gotta believe in me.
But do you lead that?
Do you lead? Well, you don't lead with it, but at some point in time, doesn't it come up? It's something that the world grapples with, right? Is, wait a minute, you want to take away my freedom to believe by telling me if I don't believe this, I don't get to go to heaven.
Well, those are two statements. You said your freedom to believe is still there.
Yeah.
So you can still believe it or not. We're not taking that freedom away. Now, the second statement, or the second part of that statement, is what Jesus said, not me. And he is the absolute truth. So your argument's not with me.
And so the argument on the freedom part is really tricky, right? Because we're saying, yeah, you're free to believe, but you either believe or you die. Right? I mean, is that really freedom?
Who said that, Phil? Who said that quote?
It came out of Keller's book. It was actually a quote by a college student. When he was polling college students when he was writing his book, and that was a college student statement. And she was adamant that you're just trying to take away my freedom to believe what I want. So I put up the example of iRobot. Remember the movie, The Robot? This was kind of even a pre-AI, so I always wonder whether movies already know stuff that's coming, or they're the impetus for what's coming, right? Because when iRobot was made, AI was not a big deal, but that was all about AI. And Sonny, the robot, says, "Now that I have fulfilled my job, I don't know what to do." And the detective said, "Well, I guess you'll have to find your way to live like the rest of us, Sonny. That's what it means to be free. The definition of freedom means you have no purpose. You get to choose your purpose. That's what freedom means." So it's kind of to the point is that if you can choose, back to your point, and you can choose what you want, but technically you're really free to do whatever you want, but there's consequences if you don't pick the right choice. And that's a tough message for us to send, isn't it? We talked about this a couple weeks ago. You know, our forefathers kind of made this problem worse by telling us we had freedom for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And we all screamed, "Don't take away my freedom. Don't take away my freedom. Don't do it." There's all kinds of countries where they take away your freedom. We don't want that. And so we get this mentality, even within the church. Let's think about it for a second. What sorts of do's and don'ts do we not like to be told that we have to follow? Once we're in the club, right, we're even told there's certain freedoms you don't have. What are the things we're told you can't do?
Can't commit adultery.
Okay, well, that's a good one. It's a biblical one. And then you get to, okay, well, can you surf porn?
No.
Okay. That's an easy one. What else is difficult? Come on, some of those you've grown up in the church.
Drink, dance.
Right. Don't drink. Don't dance.
Rock and roll music.
Rock and roll music.
Watch out for that. Guitars.
So Rhonda and I were raised in a Pentecostal church, and everything was wrong. I mean, literally, if you moved, you were going to hell a certain way. And rock and roll was a big one. My mom got in my car one day because she was borrowing my car, and I had the rock and roll on. And she storms back into the house and said, "What are you listening to?" I'm like, "Music, Mom," you know. And then I was also raised, we were both raised, that you couldn't go to movies. Couldn't go.
Couldn't do dances for sure.
For sure not dancing. You go straight to hell going to dance. But
Did you like the Kevin Bacon? Did you break
so
that?
let me, you know, here we go. So here's the deal. I'm 18 years old. I'm a senior in high school. Mom and Dad are going out of town. And my dad goes, "Look, you're free to do what you want this weekend." I said, "Okay, cool." First place I went, the movies. First movie I saw, Footloose. How ironic is that? Everything in that movie would have sent me to hell, including being in the theater. Rhonda's dad used to say, if Jesus comes and you're in the theater, you think he's taking you?
You think he's gonna stop by
Right.
the theater?
Right. I didn't think he was stopping by anywhere. I think you floated up to him. But anyway, but we get to a point, even within the church, we have a problem with don't tell me what I can and can't do. Right? It's that whole concept. Everybody wants freedom, whether you're in or out of the church. And the issue is that freedom is defined by the community you're in. And community is, by definition, exclusive. Any organization you are part of, any community, is exclusive. So we can talk about the church, a club that you're part of. Let's say you're part of a country club. Well, everybody can't be part of that. Right? It's exclusive. You can't go play golf in a country club you're not a member of. Even communities within neighborhoods can become exclusive. Right? We sit in kind of one. And we all come together in community, and once we get in that community, we have certain beliefs and certain things we think about. And if you don't have those beliefs, you're really not part of that community, you're out. So we have to understand that this concept of an inclusive community is elusive. It's an illusion. There is no such thing as an inclusive community. By its definition, it's going to exclude somebody. And so the church fits into that definition. Is the church exclusive? Absolutely. 100% exclusive. Now, this is where we have a real problem evangelizing, right? Because that's tough for someone to get their mind out around. Is that, wait, you're saying that I can't be part of this? Some say, but to say that Christianity is rigid isn't true. That you can be a part of this community. You've just got to believe. And so interesting, in parts of the world, Christianity has flourished. And if you remember, Christianity is one of the only religions that started in one town and went through the world. There's an interesting passage, I don't have time to go through it all, in Galatians chapter 2, Paul has gone down to Jerusalem to meet with the big three, Peter, James, and John. And as he's meeting with them, he has a discussion, and they end up with a plan. Peter was going to handle the Jews and evangelize to the Jews. Paul was going to handle going to the Gentiles. So what they were doing was they were saying, we have a community here. Both the Jews and the Gentiles were outside of it. Even the Jews weren't in the community. So Paul goes in and says, we will divide this up. I'll go to the Gentiles. I know Wayne's been reading Acts. It's fascinating to me. In the travel at the time, they didn't have jets to fly. And Paul goes a long way. And it's just amazing to think about how he did that without modern transportation. But he takes it to the Gentiles. Peter's down with the Jews. The fun part about that chapter is Paul calls Peter out and says, you're being a hypocrite. Because Peter's pretending he doesn't eat the stuff that Gentiles eat, and he's doing it. But he's doing it in hiding. Anyway, it's a fun part of that chapter. So there's an example today. In 1900, Christians comprised only 9% of Africa. Today, it's well over 50%. And it's interesting, there's a African scholar who explains the phenomenon of how did Africa convert to Christianity by a majority. And he says this, Africans had a long tradition of belief in supernatural good and evil spirits. When Africans read the Bible in their own language, they began, this is what happens when I do things last minute and write sticky notes. They begin to see in Christ the final solution of their longings as Africans. Christianity answered the historical challenge by a reorientation of the worldview. The Africans sensed in their hearts that Jesus did not mock their respect for the sacred, nor their clamor for the invisible Savior. And so they beat their sacred drums for him until the stars skipped and danced in the sky. After that dance, the stars weren't little anymore. Christianity helped the Africans to become renewed Africans, not remade Europeans. Right? That's a really cool concept that Jesus didn't come in and say, you can't have your own personal beliefs in your society. It just changed their mind but kept their purpose as Africans intact. And that's why it's gone. Freedom isn't simple. It's not the absence of restriction. I want to play in the NBA. I've wanted to play in the NBA since I was a kid. I could hit three-pointers like nobody's business. But look at me. I'm never playing in the NBA. I'm restricted. I want the freedom to play in the NBA, but I'm slow, right? And I could never hit a left-handed layup. So I'm never gonna make it, right? I'm free to play the piano, but I gotta do certain things to be able to do it, and some people just could never get it. So we have to understand that freedom doesn't mean there is restrictions, there aren't restrictions to us. So it takes discipline. Love is more constraining than we like to think. To love, you must lose dependence and have intimacy. You know, we always say marriage is never 50-50. Sometimes it's 100-0, right? That you lose your, quote, rights when you took that spouse, right, to give up some of your rights, and she does or he does the same thing for you. And so you have the freedom, but there are restrictions within it. And so the concept here as Christians is we have to understand that while we are free, we are also constrained. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5:14, Paul says, the love of Christ constrains us. That's a really important verse, right? Because he says, look, because I love Christ so much, there are going to be things I don't do. Not out of do's and don'ts, but because I love Christ, I'm going to do certain things and I'm not going to do other things because of my love for him.
What verse was that?
That was 2 Corinthians 5:14. So this is a hard one, though, for us to answer when we're evangelizing. And I think the answer has to be, look, we're not telling you that you're restricted. We're telling you have the freedom to join the community. And there are consequences if you don't join. That's where people get hung up. Is wait a minute, I don't join, there's consequences. If I don't join the country club, there's really not much consequences other than I can't play golf at their club. But what we say in Christianity is consequences are eternal. All right, I gotta keep moving. This is a popular one. The church is responsible for so much injustice. True? False? Go read your history books, folks.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you think of some examples?
There's times.
That's just funny how that comes right to your mind, right? The crusade. Why was the Crusaders so unjust? Why were the
A lot of death.
Brutality.
They didn't give anyone a choice.
There was no choice with them. And the brutality and the people they killed. Now, when Ron and I went to a Christian liberal arts college, our mascot was the Crusaders. Forever, until just the last few years, and I guess the college got woke and realized that the Crusader probably wasn't a good mascot. So they changed the mascot, which pissed off a bunch of the alumni. But
They changed it too. The nuns.
Valor, right? Isn't
flying
it was a
nuns.
stupid name. They
Jihadists.
gave it.
Horse.
It was dumb.
Jihadists.
A horse. It's some
A
sort of
horse
horse.
named Valor.
Yeah, it's dumb. Anyway, I was one of those pissed off alumni. But it wasn't the greatest. It wasn't the greatest mascot for a Christian college. The Crusaders did a lot of bad stuff. So the church can be viewed as dogmatic, and controlling. So how does that make the world attractive to us when we're self-righteous fanatics? Oof. I'm about to get on a high horse, so buckle in. There are 3 parts of the church that are a problem. Number 1, moral failures. Let's bring up in Gateway. The moral failure of their pastor has made the front page of the Dallas Morning News numerous times. With all that's going on in the world, the front page stories have been about the Gateway pastor's moral failure. Why?
Because he's an example and we expect more.
Okay. So, isn't he human?
Yep.
So why would we expect so much more? And he's an easy example to pick on because he's recent, but you can walk through. whole bunch of televangelists that have fallen, whether more sexually moral or financially. And the world loves it. Why?
Hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy. Why would I want to be a part of your organization when there are people who do this? In fact, you can probably think there's probably some non-Christians that you have more respect for their morality than you do for some Christians. That's a tough one, right? Because people are looking. This is why it makes the front page of the Dallas Morning News. The world is looking for us to screw up. Satan loves it. It's his playground. Christians screw up and they're just a horrible witness. Every single person in this, yes.
Let's take a step forward.
Okay.
Islam is exclusive.
Big
Correct?
time.
Correct?
Yes.
Big time. So why isn't it on the pages? And I would argue that we don't fight against flesh and blood, but principalities of darkness. And the truth is being attacked. Why does Islam get to do the things they get to do and have their, Sharia law or whatever that in London? So you're attacking Christianity, but it goes beyond human attacking. This is strictly spiritual.
100%.
And that's why we get attacked, and that's why it's on the front page, and that's why the news is crazy.
There's an old saying that says the church is a hospital for sinners, not a museum for saints.
Amen. Amen.
Right? Every single one of us, you went around the room and we said, this is going to be a safe place. Tell us what your problems are. We'd all cringe to have to share those things that we deal with. Right? But we're in a hospital today. We're here for health. We're here to work through them. Let's kind of, this one ties into it, religion support violence. Sometimes it does. But this third one is the one I think is important, and some of you aren't going to like it. Fanaticism. That we are disapproving of groups. So, can you think of some? Deal with the ones up front. Homosexuality. Whew, that's an easy one for us to go after. Right? Rhonda and I think I've told you this before. We have a college friend that is ambassador to Germany. He's now the head of the Kennedy Institute. And he's very close to Trump and all of the guys up in Washington. And he and I had a conversation. He's gay. And he has a husband. And he's very vocal about it. But he is 100% certain he's going to heaven. And he told me, he said that our college has never invited him back to speak. He's probably the most distinguished alumni we have. Never invited him back because he's a homosexual. And he says, I said, well, you sure, Rick, you feel like you're going to heaven? He said, 100%. Some of us have to swallow on that one, right, for a little bit and think about it. But we have a tendency in the church to get very fanatical. Abortion. We get very fanatical about abortion. And I always cringe when I see someone protesting outside of an abortion clinic and call themselves Christians. And they're screaming at the girls walking inside, and they're screaming at the people. Horrible witness for us as a church. Right? Horrible. That girl walking into an abortion clinic is no different than the rest of us. It's just a different kind of sin. And we become fanatical about some of the things. And I just think we're really destroying the church's witness when we do that. That's my soapbox. I'll get off of it. But you have to think about this. Who did Jesus criticize? Who did he go after?
Pharisees.
Matthew 2:31, he's talking to the Pharisees, and he says, the tax collector and prostitutes will enter the kingdom before you. He never said that to a sinner. He only said it to the religious leaders. And if you go read the prophets, especially Isaiah attacks the religious people of the time. And Jesus is saying, look, you got to love the sinners. John Calvin said this, God so identifies with the poor and marginalized that their cries express divine pain. The Bible teaches that our treatment of them is as equal as our treatment of God. Whoa. Let that sink in for a second. That God feels the pain of the sinner. He feels the pain of the marginalized. And what Calvin says here is if you treat them bad, you're treating God bad. If you treat them good, you treat God good. That's a really tough concept for us, but that's where our witness really lies, is that we love the sinner. We don't marginalize them. We don't scream at them. We love them. And then we attack each other because we're all hypocrites. Now, there are some things the church did right. Number one, it was the first organization that went after slavery. Not the South so much, but the northern churches really went out after slavery and really pushed hard to abolish it. Number two, civil rights. Martin Luther King Jr., preacher. Some of his best speeches ever were in churches, right? He took on that. And then number three, the Catholic Church and communism. Catholic Church was the one that stood up and said communism is wrong. Catholic Church also protected the word, but that's a whole different story. But they were the first ones to say that. All right, gotta move. It's fun stuff. Science has disproved God. Now this is a tough one, right? How often have you heard that? Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, argues you can't be a scientific thinker and still hold to religious beliefs. It is either one or the other. How do you combat that when somebody's a deep thinker and they say, well, wait a minute, science disproves Christianity. Science disproves God. How do you combat that argument? In a recent poll, only 7% of National Academy of Sciences believe in a personal God. Even, I think it's 70 or 80% of society believes there's a God. 7% of scientists say no God. Why?
They have their own agendas, they have their own search for meaning and purpose, their own careers dictates and community, communities that they walk through, lead them that direction. But how you combat it, you use the scientific truths and actually point to God under a real honest evaluation.
Here's where they get stuck. Here's where scientists get stuck. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. They're stuck on that one. Tell me the world was created by, who created God? Where's that discussion? We'll talk in a minute about how did God create, but they don't have any scientific, they're searching for a scientific answer. And to Ken's point, we can show them all kinds of things, but if they can't get around that concept, they can't even get to the rest of it. The rest of it's really interesting discussions, but they're like, well, wait a minute, who cares? You can't prove to me there's a God. You can't prove to me that miracles actually occurred. Everything has to have a natural cause. It has to be proved. Dawkins went on to say, either most of my colleagues are enormously stupid, or else the science of Darwinism is fully compatible with conventional religious beliefs and equally compatible with atheists. What miracles are hard to believe in the Bible?
Raising from the dead.
That's a big one, right? What else?
Red Sea.
I have heard so many stories about how the Red Sea story was. Some claim it was only 6 inches deep. There's all kinds of theories on that. What else?
Walking on water.
Can't do that. I've tried.
I know you tried turning water into wine.
Yeah, that's another one.
How long people used to live?
Right? 969 years from Methuselah.
The flood.
The flood. Could there really have been a total global flood? How in the world did Moses fit enough animals on that boat to survive all the animals we have now? Right? Not possible. What else? Jonah. Now that's a really fun one, right? You're telling me that a man was actually swallowed by a big fish and then came out and had one of the greatest revivals in the history. Now, Rhonda's dad used to say that if he was swallowed by the fish, then his skin would have been turned purely white because of the acid, so he scared everybody when he came out. That was his theory. But we could go on and on and on. The time stood still. For an entire day, time stood still. And scientists have tried to figure out whether or not they could prove through the stars that actually happened. Right? It's tough when you start. The Bible is crazy. The stories are nuts. A virgin became pregnant with the Son of God. Crazy. Right? And so it's difficult. What scientists try to do is find a reason. Alvin Plantinga said this. This is the equivalent of a drunk who insists to look for his lost keys under a street light on the grounds that light is better. Because the keys are hard to find, they must be under some street light. Right? That's the scientists believe. If it's got to be obvious. There's got to be some scientific reason for these things to have happened. And in science, they believe that conflict with Christianity happens. It's interesting because it all goes back to Genesis 1 and 2. I had never really picked up on this, but Genesis 1 actually could be more poetic than it is actual. Now, how many of you believe that the earth was actually created in 7 24-hour days? Rhonda does. She's always believed that. Oh, there you go. Right? How did that really happen? So there is a belief out there that Genesis 1 was poetic. It wasn't really 24-hour days. And so that's where we get this concept that evolution isn't necessarily completely at odds with creationism. Because if you believe, as I believe, Rhonda and I don't believe in this together, so we don't discuss it at the dinner table, that each day was a period of time, because day in the Hebrews basically defines a period of time, that it could have been millions of years, which might explain things like the dinosaurs and extinction and all kinds of things. That's where everybody goes. What happened to the dinosaurs? I don't think they were on the boat because I think they were too big, But can you imagine putting a Tyrannosaurus Rex on a boat and see if he gets along with everybody else? But you know what? Dinosaurs are described in the Bible. In Job, he describes two of them. A behemoth and the Leviathan. And Leviathan is actually defined in Isaiah 2. And they're described very particularly. So they did exist. So you can't deny the existence of dinosaurs. You just can't figure out what really happened to them. It's going to be a good discussion question in heaven. We'll get that explained. But we have this period of time where we can actually explain as Christians, look, it's not necessary. Evolution isn't like nirvana. Evolution is violent. For one species to evolve to another, that species has to go away. Right? It's a violent theory. So it's no different for us to try to describe Genesis 1 and 2. All right, final point. You can't take the Bible literally. The Jesus seminar, this is probably 20 years ago now, only 20% of what Jesus is recorded to say can historically be validated. So they think of two things, especially with regard to the New Testament. They say that the disciples, when writing the Gospel, because they were written so far after. Mark was the closest in time, and Mark wasn't even a disciple. So he wasn't even writing from an eyewitness standpoint. And that was about 40 years after the events. By the time you get to John, we're up to about 80 years, 70 to 80 years after the events. So the theory here is that when the disciples wrote the Gospel, it was either revisionist history or they were flat out making things up in order to propagate their gospel. So they made up the stories. How do you combat that?
They didn't write them all together, so how did the stories line up?
So, okay, I agree with that. So they weren't all sitting around a table drafting scripts, right? They weren't doing that. They were all written in different times in different places. So, but there are some inconsistencies. You can't deny it. There's all kinds of books written about the inconsistencies of the Gospels. Some of them don't line up. So if God's word is inherent and infallible, how could there be inconsistencies in the Gospels?
Can you give an example of what kind of inconsistency you're referring to?
So just take the resurrection. When they are there's all kinds of differences. Was there an angel on the tomb? One gospel says yes, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head. The other one says, no, he wasn't on the tomb. Who saw it?
Who first? Who saw who first?
Right, yeah, who saw it first?
But you have to look at who they're writing to. Luke has always been a journey from the cradle to the cross. Matthew was written more from a Jew's perspective. You have 66 books written by 33 different authors over thousands of years, and the Old Testament proves the New Testament. So that right there tells me is you point to the Old Testament to prove the New Testament, because there's books that one author can't keep track of what they wrote earlier. So if you have all these different authors written over centuries, and the theme is the same, and the prophecies are fulfilled, is that not a historical book? Take the Bible side out of it, and proves that this book is a historical book.
Yeah, Phil.
No one questions the writings of the Greeks or Romans or Josephus that were even before the Bible, right? They keep them as historical books. Now, the inconsistencies, especially in the Gospels, it's not, I'm making this too simplistic, that if there was an accident out here on Northwest Highway and all of us in this room were watching that accident, we'd all have a different perspective. Doesn't change the fact there was an accident. And I think a really good example of this is you've been watching the stuff going on in Minnesota with the killing. All of the cell phones are showing different pictures as they're trying to figure out what actually happened in that shooting. And it started off only one shooter. Now it's up to two, because they start taking people's cell phones and they're seeing it from different perspectives. And that's where the disciples were. Now Luke, I think, is one of the more trustworthy, because he went out and did eyewitness interviews. And what Paul does, and I got to close, what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, 1-6, he describes there was over 400 people that saw the resurrected Christ. So even though there may be some inconsistencies in the crucifixion, resurrection, factually, the issue was everybody saw him. Right? Everybody saw the resurrection, which is key, right? Because it tells us Jesus is alive. And that's the core of our belief. You should get really excited about that Paul went through and said, all these people saw him. Go talk to him. Mark, interesting, and this is an example in Mark 15:21, he talks about the man who carried the cross. And he said he was the father of Rufus and Alexander. Now, why would you put that fact in there? Who cares who he was the father? Well, because if you want to talk about it, you can go to Rufus and Alexander and say, is it true your dad carried the cross? And they'll go, yeah, it's true, right? So you have these eyewitness beliefs that give credence. And Paul talks in Acts chapter 26, he's before King Herod Agrippa, and he's trying to explain the gospel, and Herod's telling him, this makes no sense. And then Herod's brother Festus goes, this is ridiculous. And Paul says this about the crucifixion. He said, these things were not done in a cover. Everybody saw it. That concept I didn't fully understand until we went to Israel. And if you're in Jerusalem, it isn't like downtown Dallas. It's very small. It's very confined. The streets are really tiny. And when you think about it, the whole city was watching this crucifixion and knew what was happening. And so Paul's telling Agrippa, go talk to all these people that saw this happen. Everyone in that city knew there was a rumor that Jesus had raised from the dead, right? So he said, we didn't do this in private. So finally, C.S. Lewis points out that it's only been in the last 300 years that fiction became modern and realistic. That type of writing was not known in the first century. What they would write in the first century about things that happened in the past. What the disciples and Paul were writing was things that were happening at the time, and they were realistic. It wasn't some made-up story. The Bible corrects our thinking and shapes our beliefs. It doesn't turn us into Stepford wives. Right? So you can't just look at the Bible and say, well, I'm just going to believe. Here's my challenge to you. Get into it. Look at it. If you're going to be an effective evangelist to others, you need to know what the Word says. And you need to know when somebody asks you, what about this inconsistency? And have an explanation for it. So as we close, that's my encouragement, is get in, read the Word, think about these things. You know, some people don't like to be challenged, but think about it, because you're going to get the question. you're gonna be sitting at a dinner table sometime on Thanksgiving and some relative is gonna say, well, wait a minute, what about X, Y, and Z? And if you can't answer, it's pretty tough, or at least give a plausible answer and be in the Word. Oh, so, yeah, next week.
We have another week here, then we go to Romans, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, gonna be outstanding. Okay. I think you often ask yourself too, what is everything in the world has a motive, right? So what were the apostles' motives? I mean, they weren't getting rich, right? As a matter of fact, all of them were martyred. Every single one of them was murdered. So you think somebody would have caved in and said, "Let's make
Okay,
this
here's
up.
the deal."
Here's the deal, all right? I don't want to die, but not one apostle or disciple caved in. And it's all historical. There are murdered. There's a book called 12 Martyred, which is fabulous, which goes into the historical context of their murders. No one caved in. Okay.